So, not a .NET talk. Yay. So we're going to talk Git and WordPress. Git version controls in WordPress. I'm Brian Retter. I work for a company called Stormpath. I am their PHP developer evangelist. What does that mean? I go out and talk to people, and I evangelize Stormpath. It's a lot of fun. I also develop their SDK and integrations with PHP. That's not why I'm here. I'm a Laravel developer. Love Laravel, use it daily. I'm the organizer for the WordPress meetup and WordCamp, which I talked about, March 4th and 5th, take 2 months out now. I am a potter. I throw pottery.
Wow.
I stream it on Twitch. Check it out. It's twitch.tv/smithclay with a Y, not an I.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love animals. I have a dog at home. She's 12, 13, something like that, and one more. And I have been working with WordPress since version 1.5. Just give you a date on that. Version 1.5 was released February 17, 2005. So it's 11 years old now, and I've been working with WordPress for 11 years. So quite a while.
What was the big competitor to WordPress when it first came out? There were blogging tools, and there was another blog tool.
Front page.
No. There was a blog specific.
Movable type?
Joomla version 1 was around that same time.
Was it? I don't know. I came across WordPress, and that's what I stuck with.
There was one that they were kind of neck and neck for a while, and then when they became a full-blown CMS, they just pulled away.
There was something like a Zanga, or it was some weird
Maybe it was movable
X
type.
name or something like that.
I think it was movable type. That's what,
Yeah. So, talking about version control. What is version control? I'm sure a lot of you know what it is, but in case you don't, it is, I have to read this because I can never remember the actual definition. This is the actual definition of version control. It is the management of changes to documents, computer programs, large websites, and other collections of information. That makes no sense. So it's basically like having multiple versions of the files on your computer at the same time, but a lot better. So I'm sure a lot of you, if you don't use version control, you have a file structure that looks kind of like this. A bunch of different versions of your theme or any kind of file or website you're working on or any item you're working on where you want to fix something, so you've got a bug fix folder that's a duplication of that code. That is a form of version control. It's just not a very good one because you'll run out of disk space really fast. So using Git with version control systems, there's a few out there. The main two are SVN, Subversion, and Git. Subversion is how I started with version control. It's a great system, but Git is much better. And the reason I say it's much better is because it looks at file difference hashes instead of the actual file being saved. So it's not the entire file being saved for each version, it's the hash of that file being saved. If that makes sense. Git is distributed versus SVN, which is centralized repository. The best way to explain this is with Subversion, you have to have a central server for your code to live on. With Git, you don't have to have that centralized server. Most people do, and most people have GitHub or Bitbucket or one of those services for Git. However, you don't need that. We could actually set up an entire Git repository just in this room using each person's computer, and I can pull down files from your computer, and you can pull files from me. Where with SVN you have to upload it to the server and download it from there. The nice thing with Git is because it's decoupled and distributed, you can work completely offline. You can do commits offline, you can do all your updates offline, you don't have to talk anywhere. It's once you push it to a central server is when you have to be online. Git was created by Linus Linus, C Linux, same person. So a couple other advantages of it are you can easily roll back changes when necessary. Keep track of what's changed. You can who made it, when that change happened. The best thing ever in Git is git blame. Yell at people in there. I've never actually had to use git blame, but I hear it's a lot of fun. And it makes it easier to collaborate. Being able to collaborate with your developers, like I said, being able to pull things directly from them versus a centralized repository. So that's Git, but what about WordPress? With WordPress, we get into a little bit of an issue here because WordPress has a whole bunch of configuration files in it that are server-side specific. The main configuration file is the WP config file. How many of you use WordPress? I didn't see that number. Quite a few of you. Everyone knows what WordPress is, at least though. See? All right. You don't? So that's fine. WordPress is it's an open source content management system, and it's a way that you can manage all things about your website, develop new themes for it, new looks, all that kind of stuff. That's what WordPress is. There's two different versions of WordPress. There's WordPress.com, which is not, it's still open source, air quotes, but they host everything for you, and it's very limited what you can do. Then there's WordPress.org, which is the code base that WordPress.com has, and that's the full version of WordPress that gives you access to everything possible. So there are two options when keeping your WordPress installed under version control. Before I get into that, these are my best practices. There are no global best practices for keeping WordPress under version control. So what I'm saying is this is how I do it, but there are other ways you can do it as well. The two main options here, though, are you can keep the theme and plugin, whatever you're developing, in only those files under version control. And the other one is keeping the entire install of WordPress underneath version control. So inside of WordPress, there are themes and plugins, and then there's core. Themes and plugins live inside of the folder, and they're their own individual thing. And that's what that first one's talking about, where you save that single folder inside of Git. Keeping the entire WordPress install gives you the entire core, gives you all the configuration files, all the installation files, everything about WordPress in there. The advantages of keeping just the theme and plugin in Git is a smaller repository, a lot smaller repository because you don't have all that duplication of files. Or I'm sorry, not duplication of files, all the core files there. It's easier to integrate into other projects. So for theming, there's this idea of like an update server where you can save just the theme out on a server or a GitHub repo and have WordPress automatically recognize there's new updates to that theme. So you can just have WordPress that go download that new theme and install it for you. Where if you're keeping the entire version up in Git, it's a lot harder to do that way. And then the other way is, typical just Git pull into your new project that you're working on. So if you have a base theme you always work with, you can just pull that one theme in. It's shared a lot easier. So same reason I was just talking about. You can say, hey, go to this repo and get the theme that I'm working on. They can just plug that theme directly into their install that they have locally, because a lot of people have a base install of WordPress that they work from, just develop a copy. And then the other main advantage of just keeping that is the different versions of WordPress. So right now they just, I believe it's WordPress 4.4.2 just got released. One of my developers may not be updated yet because they're working on another project that is on 4.4.1 or 4.4. So being able to have just that theme file to be able to put into their configurator or their WordPress install makes it a lot easier for them.
4.4.2 is the latest.
442. I thought they just came out with that yesterday or 2 days ago, I think. Not too long ago, at least. Some disadvantages of it are, even though that's an advantage, it can be a disadvantage too, having a different version of WordPress core, because your theme may be targeted for a minimum stability of your WordPress install, or your WordPress core, and it may not work if somebody else tries to pull it in. Compatibility issues kind of goes along the same lines. And then possible differences between their development environment and production environment. So if they change a core file, which you should never change a core file, there's issues there that could come up. Advantages of keeping the old WordPress in Git. It's the same core file between dev and prod. Dev is development server, prod is production server, like live site. It's easier to spin up a new server. So I've been working on a WordPress project and I want to have a freelance developer give me a hand. I can just say, hey, go download this repository, or pull this repository down, and they have the complete install of what I'm working on, exactly what I'm seeing. But I have a little note in there that says if the database is set up on a different server, or if it's set up in a way that works, because there's some configuration items in the database, and the database stores all absolute paths for URLs. So if the URL changes, you can get some issues there. So that's why I also just make it localhost or localhost 8000, port 8000. That way it's the same across everyone's development server. There are some other ways you can modify that using like a Vagrant machine and bundle that up, and some other like server press is another option. You can bundle that entire server press install and not have the issue. Keeping it in Git is a better way to test core updates and plugin updates and things like that, where you can test it locally on your development server and then just push the entire package up. Some of the disadvantages are there are a lot of database issues, which I touched on already. Database issues of those absolute paths and URLs. There are some tools out there that can help you solve that issue, but it's a pain because a lot of that stuff is serialized in the database, so you can't just go typical database SQL query of find this string and replace it with this string. You have to unserialize, then do the find replace, and then reserialize the data. They can get pretty scary in that. It's harder to share the theme of the plugin. Yeah, you can just go copy that folder. We already touched on that. You have to have the git ignore set up correctly. Git ignore, if you are unfamiliar with what it is, it's a file that defines what files Git should ignore when it pushes or pulls data down. With this talk, I'm going to be talking about this version of keeping your WordPress in Git. I'm going to be talking about the full core, full install of WordPress under Git version control, because the other way of doing it is just like any other project you're probably used to. It's pretty straightforward. This is the one that's more difficult for people to get set up. So, the git ignore file. This is for a full install. I don't know if you guys can you guys see that? All right. So there are some files that you want to exclude. You want to exclude the WP content upgrade, because that's a folder that when you do upgrades on WordPress core, it's going to upload or add files to that folder, and you don't want those to be committed, because then your production will have issues with having those files in the upgrade folder. The other one is the uploads. Uploads is where it stores anything you've uploaded via the WordPress dashboard. So that includes any images you have, or documents, or videos, music files, anything like that that would live in your media center in WordPress. You want to exclude those. Sitemap, you want to exclude any sitemap. And the reason for that is because each server wants to have its own version of the sitemap because there could be minute differences between this server and this server that will be reflected in that map. WP config is optional. I will explain that here in a minute. And your typical system files, and the one you don't want to block that's in the uploads is your htaccess file. Htaccess file in PHP defines how that folder should work or how that directory should work in the rendering of that PHP. It has things like, let's see, one example is being able to do a rewrite. So if you hit HTTP, your htaccess file will transfer that to an HTTPS if it's set up correctly. So why do I say WP config is optional? I get slack on this all the time because everybody says, do not store your WP config file in version control. And the reason for that is because it has passwords in it. I'm saying you can, and there's ways around it. This is the best way around it. This is kind of taken from Laravel. I've implemented some of that Laravel work into the WP config file. This is just a sample of the database, but there's other properties that you can set. So this line right here is the main reason you don't want to store WP config in Git. But doing it this way allows you to set a variable on the server itself and then call that variable from the WP config file. So you can store your password on the server variables and then use it inside of your PHP script. So this is now safe to store in Git. And each server will allow you to store things the way you want, or whatever you want on that server. Most of the time, there are some hosts that don't let you modify those. Don't use those hosts because they should allow you to modify the environment variables.
So just one thing about that, a lot of times with config files like this, and I'm not as familiar with WordPress, but it'll have a mixture of things that are unique to an environment and some things that are global.
Yeah.
And so you want to be able to commit those global things.
Right.
And this is a way to be able to,
like
you said, commit everything, but have those things that are really unique to the environment.
Exactly. So there's like well, even salts and keys. There's some salts and keys in there that you would want to do this with. But then there's things like directory names and things like that, like relative path directory names that you would go ahead and not do an environment variable for. You could even, if your database name and user and host, like the host is probably going to be localhost, you could just put localhost here and not set that environment variable. Having the variables doesn't matter. You could make every define an environment variable, and it's not going to affect your system at all or your speed at all. But yeah, there's some things in there that you don't necessarily need to do environment-wise. So why do we want to keep these things out of there? The main and sole reason for that, no, I shouldn't say sole reason for it, but the biggest reason for it is it reduces the size of the repository, especially uploads folder. I was working on a WordPress project that they didn't have the uploads folder excluded, and it was a video site. So the Git repo ended up being about 30 gigs when I had to pull it down. And it was not fun because it would not pull down 30 gigs worth of data. So I don't know, I forget what we did to actually solve it. I think I went out and got I basically FTP'd everything down, created a new repository without the uploads because that's the only way I could get that data, and then committed it to a new location.
But if you were going to work on that site locally, and you didn't have the videos, then it seems like you might not be able to solve an issue if it had to do with placing the text over top of videos or something.
Yeah. So the reason we don't include, or we include the upload/htaccess folder or file is because in there we can put a declaration that says, basically, if this file doesn't exist locally, try getting it from the production server. So it'll replace that URL from localhost 128000 to domain.com. I thought I had that little snippet of code in here, but I don't. I'll throw it in here for slides later that you can look at. So just kind of an overview of the Git commands that I use on a daily basis, or the Git init. Well, I don't use Git init on a daily basis. That'd be kind of weird, but that initializes the repository. Git add, Git commit, Git status, which gets the current working copy status of the directory, anything you're working on. Git remote shows where things are going to be able to go to. Push, pull, and log. Log will give you everything about that with commits and everything. This is a really good resource if you're unfamiliar, not really really big on Git. Check that out because it has the entire list of everything that you can do with Git. Hopefully that site is still up. I didn't check it this morning. Let's look. Yeah, it's still there. Sorry. This is last time I did this was 2 years ago at WordCamp. That's the same slide deck. Thought I checked everything, but I missed out. Aliases. Aliases are your friend in Git. It may not seem like a whole lot, but if you spend most of your day working with Git and you're constantly typing Git status, Git push, Git, whatever, that time adds up, whether you think so or not. When I'm ready to push stuff or commit something, instead of typing out Git commit, I type GC. So it saves me a lot of keystrokes there. I have a lot of other aliases that aren't related to Git. You should use aliases. It basically maps keys to an entire command. Now I can do a little demo. I can try to do a little demo of all of this. Hopefully the demo gods are with me. Figure out how to do this. There we go. So are there any questions?
Well, you've got, many times you've got a hosted service, media template, something like that. May not have access to a command line or desktop because it's a hosted service. Are you saying this is part of a workflow of working locally and then pushing?
Yeah, it's so this is my WordPress workflow of local development and pushing it to GitHub. And then I use, when I use WP Engine, I'll basically keep everything in GitHub, but then I'll FTP my data up to WP Engine because they allow FTP, or I'll backup buddy everything and send it over here that way.
So you pivot on the local.
Yeah. It's for those kind of hosts. It's not the best way to do it in fully in Git. You have to do that FTP step most times. Sometimes it'll open up where you can clone a Git repository from somewhere. I do a lot of my stuff directly from my own servers. So I have DigitalOcean servers that I set up, and then I use it's called Forge. It's from Laravel that allows me to manage those servers a lot easier. Let me mirror the screen so I can see what I'm doing.
That's another benefit of the environment variables versus having them somewhere else, because then when you deploy to your production, you don't have to worry about like, oh, do I need to update passwords or anything? Because basically you can download code, and as long as you have your environment variables set up correctly, like you just don't have to modify your code between your development, or between local development or even production. Just about any, good site will let you set up environment variables.
Yeah. So this is Laravel Forge. So it's really built and meant for deploying Laravel applications, but I've made it work for my flow of deploying GitHub or WordPress applications off of GitHub. So my site, Retterer.com, increase the size I can actually go into my environment. I don't have anything set up right here. That's actually a bad example, I guess. We can go into this one here, which has environment variables. Yeah. So here you can see what my environment variable looks like. So this is just a list of environment variables that are set on the server. So my configuration files pulls in those environment variables and replaces it with that string. So a lot of good hosts are allowing you to do this kind of thing now because it's more of a secure way of doing it versus having just a random file, text file that has all of these keys in it, or a PHP file that has all of these keys in it that's only accessible by server. So, WordPress.org. This is what actually allows you to download the core versions of WordPress. Just by going to WordPress.org, download WordPress, and download 4.4.2 as of right now. And once it's done, it'll give you this zip file. Let's see if I can increase my screen size.
You know what I think? It has to be.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
Look at such a name. So once you have it, it'll give you this folder here. And that's what WordPress looks like as a clean install. So we're going to open this up into my terminal. So that's basically the same look, just in terminal. And then if I do git init, that'll create a new repository of all of those files. What I want to do is, let's open this up in PHP Storm. And while I'm doing this, ask questions, because I know it can kind of go quick. And there's a lot here.
You know, there's a git ignore like repository that has like git ignore example files for all kinds of different projects on GitHub. Yeah. So I wonder what they have for
I'm guessing they have some
for WordPress.
And I'm guessing they include WP config in there.
So, huh?
Copy and paste.
Yep. So I would go off of this list, not the one I had, because it wasn't a complete list as of now. Because it's, I guess WordPress now has the backups folder, the backup directory, and or the backup DB directory. But what we're going to do is create a new file. .git ignore. Do that. Let's get rid of the WP config. And you'll see that my list here got a little bit shorter. And my WP config file should be, well, it's because it's there's my WP config right there. So it's going to commit. So git add all. You should never git add all. It can cause you some issues if you see a file in there afterwards that you didn't need to do. And I'm going to do a git commit with a message, initial commit.
I'm trying to get this to be served for public consumption.
Right.
That's going to be on a web server someplace in the world. Everything that you were doing, you pulled down from the WordPress site to your local machine, unzipped that, and then you made a relationship with a Git server, which could either be
Not yet.
GitHub.
I've not done that yet.
Oh, but you
No,
could.
that was all still local workstation.
Okay.
So,
Jumped ahead.
right, yeah, I'm still on a local workstation right now. What I'm going to do now is go over to GitHub. And this is where I'm going to set up a new repository. And I'm going to tell my local version of Git, with git remote add version.
And Git, when you create the new repo, GitHub it gives you instructions right there, right? Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't have the -a flag.
And you're using GitHub, but the same principle.
Yeah, same.
For Bitbucket.
GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, which some companies use. It's really any Git centralized repository for that, or Git server. My error was I was using -a for add, but they don't have that flag. It should be a flag. So now, if I do Git remote in listable, you'll see the new repo there. This is all still local workstation, okay? The next step is when I'm actually going to push it to GitHub.
But you can, without pushing it up here, you can make all kinds of changes and delete things and make all kinds of crazy stuff. And you've got some of the advantages of Git here is that it's under version control, and you can back out some of the oops.
Yep, I can roll back, or I can undo a set of commits, or I can blame, or any kind of thing.
Pushing it up here is going to give you the advantage of a decentralized. So this could go up in flames. You can always go back to here because it's up on the cloud.
Yeah, or the other thing too is, since I'm on my local workstation, I said you can actually pull directly from me. You can. That's one of the great things about Git, but it is a pain to get set up correctly and get permissions set up correctly. Yeah, peer-to-peer stuff is a pain with Git. At least I've found. There might be some better way that I'm not doing. But once I do this push from local workstation up to GitHub, that will allow another developer to come in, Dev 2, to come in and pull that down a lot easier. So if I do a git push, set my upstream. So that basically just says, hey, Git, just monitor this branch, my local branch, against the repositories branch, the one up on GitHub. Origin is the name of the server that I'm pushing to. And then master is the branch that I'm on. So once I do this, I can just type git push, and it's going to know where I'm trying to push it to and what branch I'm trying to push to.
Yeah, so you're setting kind of a default remote server.
Yep. So it's going to try to push everything up. And there you can see it's created a new branch master, which corresponds with master on GitHub. And then if I refresh this screen should change to be my WordPress install. And it's going to include the WP config file. And if we look at that, you'll see that things still are set to the actual variables. So what I want to do, back on our diagram, I just made this connection here.
And you push all the new content up.
Yeah. So let's say Dev2 made some changes and they pushed their content back to GitHub because it's a two-way street. I can then from GitHub pull my data back into my local workstation just by running git pull. And it's going to say everything's already up to date, no changes needed. So here's where I would make these changes. So let's just say the database name is going to be the same on local and my production. So I'll just leave that as WordPress. But my username is going to change. So this is where I do my env square bracket WPDE user, and that, sorry, it's kind of small.
I wish there was an easier way to
Yeah.
teach someone to do that.
So this, the WPDB user, that can be anything you want. You just have to remember what you put in there so you can set up your environment variable as the same. And then just copy this, speed, DB password, WPDB password. Save that, go back to terminal. You can see that it changed yellow. That's just a setting I have in my terminal that allows me to see what's going on. If I do git status, it's going to say my WP config was modified. I can git add WP config, and then git push. Sorry, git command. I forgot the command. Update to, and then you can see my local version is clean. Everything is ready. But if I do git status, you can see that I'm one commit ahead of origin master. So I can do a git push. And it'll push that change up to GitHub. And then here, if I refresh this file, you can see those changes were made. So now, any questions on that? All right. So now what I can do is go back to Forge. And again, this can apply to any server system that you use. I'm just going to set up a test domain. Have a site. I think it'll let me do this. So basically, this is just going out and creating that website for me on the server, getting all the configuration set up and everything. I can go here.
So Forge is continuous integration?
Kind of, it can be, but it allows you to just manage servers easier.
Yes.
But there's an aspect in it that allows you to, if it sees a change on a certain branch that you set in Git or any version control system that you set, it'll automatically deploy that code to that server, and it's zero downtime. So GitHub, master. Not going to install Composer, that's something to do with Laravel. Install the repository. It's going to complain about not being able to install the repository because it's trying to run some other code that fails related to Laravel. But it actually does install that repository for you.
Brian, how do you set your environment variables on your local machine?
There's a couple ways you can do it. In terminal, you can go to, I believe it's your ZSHRC file, or I forget what the default one is.
Bash RC?
Bash RC, yeah. Or profile.
I think it's
Bash.
Bash short profile. Yeah.
Okay.
Bash.
But mine is ZSHRC because I'm using Z shell.
Mm-hmm.
I can go in here and I can just say export WPDB password, I think is what I call it, and some password. Super pass.
Okay.
And if you're on a Windows machine, you do it through your system environments.
Is it? Okay. I haven't touched a Windows machine for 4 years. So,
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
Okay.
um,
So
So
you
go ahead and write
typically use the same, like for all your projects, like say you have 4 or 5 projects.
I'll use the same host, same password, and same username, but a different database name.
Right. Okay.
For on the local machine. Because I use root as my user and then no password is my
Right.
password. So right now, because I changed that file, but I didn't source it, I didn't load it into this terminal.
Right.
If I echo WPDB password, it comes back blank. But if I open up a new terminal window and I run that same command, it'll come back now as the environment variable that I just set. And now that's permanent every time I open up a new terminal window. So from here, if I do PHP serve, which spins up a new server from this terminal window.
Yeah.
There's an error establishing database connection because I don't have a database set up. So now that I have created that, I can go into my environment variable on the server. This is basically editing that environment list on the server that I created that website on. And I can have that same BDD password.
So since we've got 3 points on the board there, each one of those have their own discrete environment configuration, so you have to touch in 3 places.
Yeah.
So that should be only touched once, right?
I'm sorry, what?
That should only be touched once.
The environment variable? Not necessarily, because you may change passwords, or you mean like first, like you actually modifying it or editing it?
For a workflow for which you configure the environment variables, you don't have to touch them every time you commit.
Right, yeah. Once it's in there, it's always in there. But if you have to change the password, you of course have to go back in there and change it. So the way I've got it set up in there, there's now a .env file that loads in to the server, and Forge automatically did this for me. And it's going to monitor this now. And anytime there's a GitHub change, it's going to automatically run that and deploy it to my server. And because I have this, and I have my password set up, it's always going to be working on the server, and it's always going to be working on local host.
Is Forge free or?
Forge is $10 a year, or $100, or I'm sorry, $10 a month, or $100 a year.
Yeah.
But that's on top of your hosting costs.
Yeah.
So if you can use DigitalOcean,
Yeah, so-
EC2, a lot of different options.
So I'm using DigitalOcean on top of this, so I pay another, I think it's $20 for the server that I just modified a month.
Saves you a lot of time, doesn't it?
A lot of time. Before Forge came out, I was spending probably a day and a half configuring servers for each website, because nothing would work the first time or the second time.
Which one you use for Glide?
What's that?
Which one you use for Glide?
EC2? Or Beanstalk?
Beanstalk.
That's
Yeah.
a little different. That's not a whole server. That's a
That's
self-scaling
just a deployment.
application.
Or Beanstalk.
Beanstalk is self-scaling application, or self-scaling application environment.
Oh, I'm thinking of
Deploy is the,
Code deploy.
Beanstalk app. This
Oh,
one.
Beanstalk, yeah, no, AWS Beanstalk.
That's pretty much what I have. Any questions? You know, it's kind of a more technical, I don't know how technical you guys usually get, but. Yeah.
Great.
I got a question for you. So you version control, like when WordPress does release a core update or something, 4.2, do you usually check on master and then update it locally and then push it up? Or this is all assuming you keep everything?
So at all times, this and this are in sync. Well, I should say my branch that I'm monitoring on GitHub are in sync with server. What I'll do is I'll pull down that branch from here. Do any updates here that I want to do, the core updates, the theme update, plugin update. If it works, and I didn't modify any files, like I didn't modify any of my theme files, I'll just go to the server and hit the update button.
Okay.
Because WordPress has really easy updates. Click on the button update for a theme and plugin. And because my htaccess file ignores the WP content, I'm sorry. No, that was the old way. I'm sorry. Because I would have, without Forge, this is how I did it. I would then push from my server back to GitHub.
Okay.
With Forge, I would have to, from localhost, push it in GitHub, and then, otherwise you would get conflicts the next time. But without Forge, that's the way I do it, is I would just check here, update here, and push GitHub. Sorry. Going back old school. Yeah.
So One of the questions I'm struggling with Drupal is that the database is used for kind of two different things. One, you have content, and obviously, you know, as you're developing or whatever, that's continuing to accumulate, and you kind of want to leave that alone when you're doing site updates. But then it also uses the database quite a lot for structure and functionality, as opposed to having it anywhere in the code.
Right.
So do you run into the same thing with WordPress? Do you have a similar problem, or
No.
is it not so much?
Not so much, because all the structure, I shouldn't say all of it, 99% of the structure, unless you have a plugin that stores some stuff inside of the database, it's going to be just the data in the database. And then what I would do usually is I will, if it's going to be a major update that I'm doing, I'll tell my client, hey, your website can't be touched for a day. I'll clone their database, the production database, down to a development database, work against there, and then I'll clone that development database back up to production. There are some issues with that, like if they're an e-com site, or there's
Lots of user.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, stuff like that. The thing you can do is there are some tools out there for WordPress, and I'm sure there's some tools out there like that for Drupal. I'm not sure. I don't use Drupal. That allow you to diff the databases, so you'll pull the production database down to development, and then run that diff tool to move your development back into production. There's some issues there too, but I mean, there's really no good way to handle that I've found.
Yeah, with Drupal specifically, there are tools where you can take some of those, like you can make changes locally and actually export those to like a file, like an array of configuration variables, and then commit that, push that up, and whatever the production server will read from that and make the updates. But
Yeah, I don't use Drupal, so I don't
it's,
know that.
you know, with anything like a content management system, there's, you know, being able to configure things through the interface is really powerful, but you run into those exact problems where if you add a new field, and I'm not sure how this works in WordPress, if you add a new field, all that information about the field name and all that kind of stuff is stored in the database.
Yeah, same.
And so, if you make that locally, the only way to get that up is to either redo it manually on your production server, or find some other tool like that, where you can actually export it to a file somehow and push it up. So,
It's not fun, but
Yeah, or if you have a separate database, if you have your database completely separated from the site, connected it from production and from local.
yeah,
But you just have to be careful, because you have to know at
Right,
any time
yeah.
you're manipulating production data.
yeah. So that's how I started actually, was I just made my connection string hit the production database, but then I started running crap. I just changed a field name, and now that data doesn't work anymore. So,
one of the cool things I think and I've never done this, but I've used Forge before, which is, it's a great tool. You told it which branch to pull from, and so as soon as master is updated, it goes ahead and deploys the code. You could set up a new site, right? It's a QA site, and you can, make some changes and actually test it.
yeah,
And so you could set up like a branch called QA or
Yeah.
something like that, and merge in any changes that you want into there, and then go test it on your QA site, and then once everything looks good, merge those into production and then up deploy it.
So the quick deploy, which I just enabled, this is where you would set that branch for the automatic deployments of any change. But then when I set up that site, I told it. So you can see I've got two sites here, Digipick and Dev Digipick. This one monitors the Dev branch, and this one monitors master.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing you can do with Forge is, instead of having it directly monitor the GitHub, if you scroll down, it actually gives you a URL also. So
Yeah.
if you want to use some type of continuous integration tool, like Travis CI or Circle, to actually run tests and everything before it deploys, then you just set up your continuous integration with that URL. So it's not monitoring.
And you just have to visit it, just a GET request on it.
But you would normally set up like Travis CI or Circle CI to hit that URL. So after it passed the test, then it would automatically deploy.
if anybody had aspirations to be a freelancer, WordPress is a great place to make a little bit of extra cash because there's two areas where you can make cash. One is by creating themes, custom themes, and selling those through a number of avenues, not only through the WordPress.org, but there's a lot of different sites that you can make money off of their sites because they sell themes, but there's also
You can't
plugins.
sell on .org.
You cannot sell?
You cannot sell. .org has to be free. You can, as of right now, which may change probably soon because Matt's flipping out a little bit, Matt, who created WordPress. You can do freemium model, but that may be going away. I've not read that anywhere. That's my guess, is it's going to go away.
Yeah, you could put a teaser site that says, here's the baseline, but if you want the extra cool features, then you have to buy it through this other avenue. Then the other is plugins. And you can do a lot with WordPress, but everybody wants to do something custom with their website. So custom plugins is a really big revenue stream right there. A lot of people have a career of creating themes and creating plugins and this extra coin in your pocket. And what Brian's just walked you through, you could apply that for either one of those scenarios. If you wanted to create a custom theme, you'd probably want to do this type. You'd want to put it into GitHub for a repository to keep it safe. And also help you to collaborate and bring other people in to help. If you are not a designer, you can bring a designer to help you with that theme. A plugin, same thing applies. So if you think about freelancing, this is a great schematic for how you can get into a workflow of start working and developing for WordPress.
And it even applies outside of WordPress too. This is the basic diagram of the workflow for Git. It can apply to anything you're doing. The plugins that he was talking about, this is one of the plugins that comes with WordPress installed out of the box. Plugins can be extremely simple to make. This is a single file that pulls a quote out of an array and prints it on the dashboard. That's all it does. So
It's the first thing I turn off.
Yeah, first thing you turn off, and the second thing you do is you delete it. So, but it can be as simple or as complicated as possible. Yeah.
Brad, on a more higher level, what are your thoughts on static site generators that are making such a solid impact on building sites and do not have the development maintenance overhead that WordPress brings? What's your
So you're talking like Jekyll or
Jekyll,
something like that?
Yeah, and the hundreds of
they're great tools. I'll be the first to admit it. They break down when there's multiple people working on them.
Collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration on them sucks. And it's just, it becomes a nightmare. They're great tools for a team of 2 or 3. And if you're creating a blog post every week or so, and you create the blog post and you publish it. But if you get into like a review process, I would create a blog post, then our marketing director would review it and make their changes, and then somebody else would review it, make their changes, come back to me and say, we really need to change the title of this. Then you have to change file names and change all this other kind of stuff. So it can get pretty complex. And at that point, I think it's better to use something like WordPress or even Drupal or some other web-based CMS for editing content.
Okay, thanks.
And Jekyll has a lot higher barrier to entry. I mean, Jekyll, it's not like WordPress, you can go download the code and literally install it, and another setting, other than setting up the WP config, you can do everything from the UI, like install themes, install plugins. Jekyll, you have to get into
It's
the nitty gritty of code.
And the other thing too is I always tell people when they see the WordPress dashboard, which I can show you while I'm talking about this, for the people that haven't seen it. With WordPress, a lot of people see this dashboard and think, man, that's way complicated. I don't want to touch it. But what they don't know is if you can use Word, you can use WordPress. It's that simple. Where's my password? So this is what the dashboard looks like for WordPress. And then if you want to create a new post for it, you just add a new post. And they have a WYSIWYG editor. So you just type your post in here. You can save drafts of it before you publish it, and you just publish it and it's up. It's live.
Probably the biggest advantage of the static site generator is it's going to be a lot faster. The WordPress chronically has problems with slowness. You're always having to optimize the database.
There's that, and then there's caching tools that you use within WordPress to allow that speed to speed up a lot. But yeah, static sites are going to be a lot quicker. Yeah.
So, I had a discussion one time on the managers and everything between branching and cherry picking. Is one better than the other? Is this is it 6 of one, half of the other?
I think it's about the same. Cherry picking is more of,
Is it more
really, you have to have a branch to be able to cherry pick into.
Right.
You can cherry pick your changes. I don't use it a whole lot. I think I've used it twice since I'm starting to forget. Sorry, not GitHub, they're not the same. Use yourself. So if you use cherry pick, I use branches for everything. Even if I'm changing like a line of code, I create myself a feature branch because I don't want the issue of, which is basically just a branch that I can merge in, because I don't want to risk having a screwing up my development branch or my master branch. I have something I can go back to if I mess up something.
Yeah, the cool thing was it kept the little tree that you see, they used to debug it at the time, it kept it all in one single line. That was their whole reason for
That's more rebasing than anything. And I'm not a fan of rebasing. I know a lot of people when you're doing contributions to sort of projects, they won't merge your stuff in unless you rebase it.
Yeah.
So there's one commit, and they rebase that into their project. I don't like it because it loses the history. It loses that.
Well, that was kind of
what you do.
That was
You
kind
can
of the thing.
you can do rebase with a preserve.
Yeah, you can preserve it, but open source projects don't want that.
Yeah.
I run an open source project, like I manage an open source project, our SDK and our integrations. I want all that history in there so I can see what the committer should, or what the committer did. So that's my preference. I don't know if there's necessarily a wrong way to do it. So it's really just kind of works for you.
Learn to get flow.
Yeah.
Well, that's one I've used. It's not a different language or anything, it's just a specific process.
Yeah, and there's a
for
tool.
branching.
There's a tool in command line that allows you to. It does it for you, but you don't have to have a tool. It's just a methodology of using it.
Yeah, they didn't like the way that I use branches for everything. They wanted me to use Tower and cherry pick everything.
That sounds awful.
So there's a good document on the Bitbucket website as far as the Git flow. It's well documented there.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you search Git flow chart,
And I think I did a talk on it here, what was that, 4 or 5 months ago?
In the summer, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So there's, I probably have the slides out there. There's probably a link to it. If you look back through the meetup pages, I had the slides on Git flow.
this is the chart that I suggest everyone look at.
Okay.
So Git flow works really well.
I can explain it to you
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with, with branching and everything, and really like it.
Cool.
And stuff, so.
Any other questions? Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, Brian.